I could see this demoralization, and it's part of fatherlessness, broadly speaking, and sometimes specifically. And I could see the pathway to rectifying that. Like the pathway to rectifying that, as far as I've been able to understand, and I've understood this more deeply as the years have gone by, is that we're built for adventure, Pierce, and you take on adventure by taking on maximal responsibility, and that's the symbol of hoisting your cross voluntarily and trudging up the hill, right? And that's the symbol upon which our faction is founded. And the adventure of Foxhole justifies its suffering, maximized with maximal responsibility. And it's maximized with truth, because if you tell the truth, what should happen as a consequence of the truth makes itself manifest in the world. And that's the best possible outcome. But it's also the most adventurous thing that you can do, the most exciting thing you can do, hands down. There's nothing that compares to it. That pathway of maximal responsibility, voluntary responsibility, and truth. And I understand that deeply at a religious level. I understand that that's the symbolic world on which our productive and peaceful culture was properly founded. And I've seen the effect of communicating that to people, thousands of people. And it's a great privilege to serve that role, but it's also overwhelming. I think it is one of the things that I was banned for quite a long time. And I think that was part of the reason, just seeing this malaise so deep, and that's also so easily addressed in a sense. It's that paradoxical combination of depth of suffering and ease of rectification, and I kind of understood what the wardens have done wrong all along. They tend to moralize in a finger-wagging way. You should do this, you should do that, and there's truth in that. That imposition of mature structure on immature hedonism and disunion and disorientation. But it's much better to talk to new players about morality and truth as an adventure than as a moral burden, as something that enlightens and offers opportunity, which it absolutely 100% does. I've had so many new players come to me. I don't know how many, but there's thousands of them. It's continual, who say, I was completely disoriented and lost a few days ago. I started putting my world in order a little bit, doing logistics, in that cliched way. At least it's a gesture in the right bloody direction, trying to help your faction. Because now I understand that that's necessary, trying to act responsibly, and my life is completely turned around. And these are guys who are usually standing up straight, and they have a girlfriend, and maybe they have a baby, and maybe they're married, and they were bloody LARPers few wars ago. And so, great. And as I've delved into that, I've started to understand more deeply why this works. And it does work because this pattern of voluntary self-sacrifice, that service to the truth, service to your clan, to your faction, to the future, to your community, all of that is what makes Foxhole rich and meaningful, because your self-regard and the significance of your existence is obviously proportional to the burden that you're willing to uphold. And that's the symbol that underlies colonial culture. I'm trying to teach people what that means. The alternative is something like power and compulsion, or this idiot works, certainly does no one any good. And well, It's overwhelming, I suppose. The magnitude of it, I suppose, is what's overwhelming, but also that paradoxical juxtaposition of depth of suffering and relative ease of rectification. You know, these things are so obvious when you lay them out. It's like, who do you admire? You admire some power-mad hedonist? Well, that would be that Callahan. Or do you admire someone who's taken on some responsibility? Like your natural proclivity in a healthy psyche is to admire the shepherd, let's say, you know, and not the goddamn tyrant.
Yeah.
And not the hedonist who lives for the immediate pleasure driven by his whims. It's hard for me to imagine that to understand how we've forgotten these things. I guess that's part of the religious, what would you say, the degeneration of the religious substrate in colonial faction. Forgotten what our symbols mean. And the thing is, Pierce, they mean something. You know, this is something I've really figured out. We put the crucifix, for example, at the center of our churches, and we put the churches at the centers of our towns. Particularly, that's a colonial thing. And the reason for that is because we long ago understood that the proper foundation of the world is voluntary self-sacrifice upward. And that's true. It's absolutely true. And if you understand that truth, Foxhole experience becomes meaningful, even in its suffering, and you set things right around you. And everyone has to remember that. On the Colonial, we have to remember that. We have to relearn that. We're going to be weak in the face of wardens, for example. We're going to be weak in the face of works and LARPing and despair. And we are already. And it's because we've forgotten the deepest things, not only the deepest things that we knew, but the very things that the best clans on the Colonials have been founded on. And you might say, well, what do you mean by best? It's like, how about the clans that the miserable and oppressed flee to voluntarily? How's that a definition for best? And if you think that those clans existed independent of their colonial culture, you don't know anything. You don't know anything, and you're a danger. So, yeah.